Welcome to the Brain Development Podcast. We're here to show parents there is a pathway to healing the behavioural and learning symptoms of their autistic, dyslexic, ADHD, OCD, Asperger's, dyspraxic and dysgraphic child. And my purpose is to help empower parents to understand how they can build their child's brain from the bottom up to invoke change. And this morning we have Vicky Finlayson from the Happy Healthy Unicorn. Hi, Vicky.
Hi, nice to be here again. Thank you.
And what we're going to be talking about today is all the symptoms that you see in your child with learning and behavioural difficulties and what some of those symptoms could be related to. So, Vicky, start us off. Where are we going to begin?
Okay, yeah. So the reason I wanted to talk about this is I think that what we see on the surface, it's almost like when you see that iceberg thing on the poster where you've got like the tip of it, and they're the symptoms that we're seeing as parents, and they're the things that stress us out and trigger us. But what we're not seeing is like all of the underlying stuff that the children are struggling with and all those imbalances underneath that are actually driving that top end stuff that we're seeing, that we just see as autism. And that's kind of what we're led to believe, is that all of those surface level things at the top of that iceberg are, you know, what we see as autism, and it's like, oh, that's part of their personality. These are things that can't be changed. But if we look beneath that and just dig a bit lower, we can look at all of the reasons why those things might be happening, and then it can give us a bit more like grace for our children for a start, because we can be thinking, oh, actually, the reason they do this is because of this, this, and this, and it's not just them, you know, just like trying to like kill me on a daily basis. And also it helps us to sort of unpick and unpeel a bit of that and let us and give us like lots of hope, because we know that if that on top is just a surface level thing and it's driven by all this underlying stuff that we know is reversible, then we know that that top end stuff can actually change and it can get better and improve. And that's really lovely for us to know, isn't it, as parents? So I'm going to just go through just briefly sort of some of the main symptoms that I hear about in practice a lot and kind of what that can mean. So the first one I want to talk about is dry humping. And the reason I want to talk about this is because I know it's like one of those like topics that's so taboo. And like I have so many parents that, you know, in forums, they don't really want to speak about it because it's actually like parents find it really mortifying and embarrassing when their children are like, you know, rubbing their genitals and kind of humping on things and stuff like that. And it looks like it's something that the child's doing for pleasure, but actually this is driven by a sensory need. And usually I find it's because there is oxalates gathering in that area, and oxalates are like sharp crystals that form. And in 70% of autistic kids, they have high oxalate levels. And this can be driven by dysbiosis in the gut. It can be driven by fat malabsorption. It can be driven up by mold exposure. Lots of different things can drive this issue. And so if those sharp crystals form there, almost like it looks like the child's doing this for kind of joy, but actually it's rubbing that area. And eye poking is another symptom of that. So if your children are eye poking and rubbing there, it's usually because these sharp crystals are gathering in those areas and they're almost trying to like rub them out. Yeast overgrowth is another really big driver of dry humping. And honestly, in practice, I find when we clear yeast overgrowth, that behaviour immediately goes. And then a parent might sort of, I don't know, like they might have gone and done something else, and then like 3 years later there might be like a little uptick in yeast, and they'll be like, oh, actually, like you can see those symptoms correlating, and then the parent sort of gets to know what those are, and then it actually kind of, it makes you feel a bit better, you know, because in that moment it's like, especially if you're out in public, you're thinking, oh my goodness, like this looks so inappropriate, and it makes you feel like, you know, it makes you feel embarrassed, but the child cannot help that at all. And actually what I've found is that when we're like really oppressive and trying to stop our kids doing things, it almost builds more stress in the body and makes them do it more. So it's kind of one of those things where, of course, we can redirect, but because it's a biological thing, an imbalance that's causing that, there's no way of really stopping them doing it until we kind of heal the gut or like do the things that we need to do to like eliminate oxalates or yeast so that behavior stops. So I think like that's really important to note as well, is like when your children are having some of these behaviors, it is like they cannot help any of them. You know, it's like it is part of an imbalance that's in their body that's driving this, and trying to say, you know, changing that without any healing is very difficult. By just saying, stop doing that, stop doing that. The child can't stop doing that because there's a biological thing driving that behaviour. And I think that's really important, because obviously the child's not doing that deliberately, and then we're kind of just putting more stress into the child. So
yeah, I think when Archie was young, I used to think that some of the behaviours, he was doing it on purpose.
Yeah.
And then when I truly realised that he just couldn't help some of these things, like listening was one. He's not listening to me. He's not following the instructions. It's not because he didn't want to. He just couldn't. And so, you got to forgive yourself, but also forgive them.
Yeah, of course. And it was the same with Rose. There were so many things like vocal stimming. I'll move on to that one. So lots of our kids have stimming behaviours, of course. And that's like something that is really, so these two I find are some of the most triggering, and then pica, which I'll move on to next. But when our children stim, it can be really overstimulating for us, who probably haven't slept because our child hasn't slept all night. Like Rose was up all night, not sleeping, and then all day she would go, ah. So it was almost like torture from both ends. It's like my brain couldn't take any more. And obviously it's like, it's not her fault. Obviously in the moment you just want to strangle their neck a little bit and sort of like stop it from, do something to just stop the noise. But they can't help it. When children stim, and it can be vocal, they could flap, they might spin, they might flick things, there might be like another repetitive behaviour. But obviously they are self-soothing. And like, before we move into like the medical situation, I think it's really important to understand that stimming for our kids obviously is driven by imbalances, but it's a way of them self-regulating. We all actually do that in like a more sort of functional and acceptable social way, but obviously in our children it doesn't look like that, because they have no idea of what social norms are. So of course to them, if they just want to spin for an hour, if they want to flap like they're going to take off like a bird, or they want to go they don't understand what social norms are. So of course they will do that because it feels good in their body, and they're trying to self-soothe in that moment. And so some of the sort of like underlying like medical causes for this are retained primitive reflexes, which obviously Lara you know all about, because that's to do with like the vagus nerve and some of the brain hemispheres not being like as wired together as they should be, and that can cause overwhelm in the sensory system. And so they're kind of like, they're almost like because humming, it will regulate, or it kind of like helps your vagus nerve in terms of like the balance. So that's one of the reasons why our kids go because it's like it feels good in the body. That's why some of them jump. It's like they're self-soothing, and that's what stimming is, isn't it? It's a self-stimulating, self-soothing behaviour to kind of
used to like spin. He used to spin just one way all the time. And that's vestibular system. He needs input into his vestibular system because it was weaker one side. It's amazing. So they are actually trying to fix themselves in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that I find like this, like the stimming thing, I find fascinating, because there's so many reasons why that can be there. But like overall, overriding all of this is just to know that although it drives you insane, it's almost like the more attention you focus it, because they're trying to self-soothe, the more stress you add into that, and like, stop doing that, and try and like, it's almost like you're adding more stress into a really overloaded system. So they're going to do it more. Even like, so you're almost like exacerbating them, even though like, I get it, because obviously you and I have been through this and we totally understand how like triggering these things can be. But so other reasons why kids might stim, there might be gastrointestinal issues, which is obviously like, that is always found in our kids. It's part of the picture. So things like constipation. So if a child jumps, they might almost be like withholding. I find that, and a lot with tiptoe walking also, that can be another sign of constipation, where they're just, you can imagine yourself, can't you? If you've been in pain and like letting go of stool is really painful, you're almost like, you can jump, and it's sort of like you're holding your bowel really tightly to stop that happening. Food allergies and sensitivities, because they're in pain, and again, like they're just overwhelmed and trying to regulate. Mineral deficiencies like magnesium, because of course magnesium is calming and it helps you to regulate glutamate, which is always high. So elevated glutamate can also cause stimming, because it causes like overexcitation of the brain and body. Also elevated ammonia can cause stimming, and that can be caused by inefficient breakdown of protein or parasitic infection. And of course, we've already discussed the primitive reflexes. But as you can see, like there's like all of these reasons why this is happening. And like, you know, if we can like go bit by bit and start to like get the body healthy. And this is the other thing I wanted to say, is that when we're going through these symptoms, is that when we work together, and you know, when I was working with Rose and you were working with Archie, it's almost like I was never really fixated on, oh, she's stimming, oh, this is happening, we need to fix that symptom and go like that hyper fixated into like one thing. It's very much like, if we get this body into a really healthy state with everything in it that it needs and everything out of it that it doesn't, these symptoms just fall off.
They literally just disappear.
Yeah, they just fall off as you go through, and it's like you're not even focusing on it. And so it's like really fascinating when you see that. And then another one that is really triggering, and this was especially triggering for me because it's unsafe, is pica. And maybe we'll do a whole podcast on this topic because there's loads to say about it, but I'll briefly sort of cover it here. Pica is where the child will eat non-edible items. And honestly, when we were going through this, when we first started out, and Lara and I were just chatting about this before we started this podcast, Rose would eat everything. And I mean, so she was picky, so she wouldn't eat like meat, and like she really didn't like meat. She didn't really like cakes and stuff like that. She liked dried, crunchy things and fruit. And but she would put everything in her mouth and try and eat it that was non-edible. So I remember one time we went to the park, and you know, lovely as people do this, there was some broken glass on the floor. And she picked it up and started to try to chew on it. And you know, and you just like, but I see this so often where parents are like, what do I do? You know, on Rose's first EHCP, you know, the care plan, when she was first diagnosed, we had on her care plan that she couldn't be unsupervised around the sensory bin or sensory play because she would eat Play-Doh, sand, like anything, glue, you know, she would just eat everything. And the reason that kids do this, it's like, it's the body's kind of like, it's almost like evolutionary, and it's the body always trying to be well innately. So when your body's so low on minerals like zinc and iron, what it does is it will be looking for things that it thinks. So you'll find a lot of kids might eat soil or stones. They might lick stones or grass, might pick up grass. And this is just because their body is searching for minerals. So they're basically trying to seek out any minerals. And a lot of kids lick metal. They'll chew on metal items like key rings and things like that. And that's because obviously they're desperately trying to get the iron. And it's like just the body again. So you imagine like knowing this information. It's so empowering, isn't it? To think like, you know, my kid isn't just doing this to like piss me off. You know, I shouldn't swear, but like, you know, they're not doing this just to like this, you know, and that isn't, again, like, it's not what autism is. Like, these are imbalances in the body. And like, I'm happy for, like, I celebrate autism and like people who have thinking differences and like neurodiversity. That's great. But the child, like, I don't celebrate a child like being so chronically unwell that they have to like cope forever with this really sick body that isn't actually autism. It's all this like just ill health. And these are just things that we can do things about, that they don't have to like live with forever. And I see this, you do also, Lara, like we see this with kids like every day, where these symptoms, like these specific ones, can just melt away, like as you're like replenishing the body with what it needs. So with pica also, I often find that children who have parasitic infection, which is really common in our kids also, will have pica. And that's because obviously parasites will eat a lot of the minerals or like the vitamins and minerals that we need to kind of keep our body stable. So things like iron and B12, parasites will just eat those. Like they will take all of those. So I normally find kids with a parasitic infection will have really low iron and B12 because obviously the parasites are just eating it all. So yeah, it's just so interesting. And then some of the other things that I wanted to talk about is a speech delay or lack of speech. Obviously there are so many, there's a myriad of things that can cause a speech delay, but I'm just going to focus on some of these and some of the minerals that are really, really important for speech. And what I wanted to say is that there's all this talk at the moment about putting in like folinic acid and high dose folate. And Actually, I think that, and this is because there's something called, lots of parents are running out and doing the FRAT test at the moment, which is the folate receptor antibody test.
I spoke to a parent yesterday and they'd done this.
Yeah. So from my perspective, what I find is that, and you know this because it's something we were talking about again before, is that when you're desperate and you're in this realm, and you and I both know how that feels because obviously we've been there ourselves, and you just so desperately want your child to like be better and well and like and sleep and like function and be able to like say your name or have a conversation. And so I totally get the desperation. I understand like how it feels where you just want like to fix things so that like your child can be there with you and like be present. But I find what ends up happening is that all of the sort of stuff that the body needs from a foundation, we speak about this all the time, all the foundational stuff is missed. And then we go for like the top end therapies that are expensive and we feel like they're a magic bullet. And I find folate is one of those where you're not thinking about anything else that's going on in the child's body and you're just putting in a high dose of a supplementation to kind of get something to start cycling. And actually, I find folate can be, and the reason I'm talking about this is because it's one of the big things that I see recommended for speech all the time. And the thing is with folate is that you know, if a child is very undermethylated, and we spoke about this on another podcast, it can actually be harmful. It can make them a lot worse, especially if there's like if you've got a teenager, for an example, and there's a depressive sort of undertone or tendency, and then you put a lot of folate in, it will depress serotonin further. So it will make that, you know, it can cause like suicidal thoughts in some, you know, in older kids. I find this more. So I kind of wanted to say about that because if you think about that, again, that FRAT test, and the reason I'm talking about this is because it's relevant to speech, and a lot of families will have uncovered that. Yeah, so when like people or like parents are going through, like they want to get speech for their child, like they want their child to speak to them, they'll probably come across FRAT. But if you think about what FRAT does as well, is it's checking for like one antibody on a receptor. So if we think about that in like the broader context of what that is, an antibody is something that the immune system creates towards something that it sees as a foreign invader. So all that means is that the immune system is confused and it's creating antibodies towards something it shouldn't be in the brain. Well, so if we're just putting in like a high dose supplement, we're not really thinking about why the immune system has done that in the first place. And so that is sort of where I think like I would prefer to look and help, because then what, are we just going to leave high dose folate in forever and not deal with like a really dysregulated immune system, which then is probably going to lead on to like autoimmunity in later life because we've not kind of balanced the immune system at that level. So I just find it a bit like, I don't see the logic in that. My brain can't understand like why that happens, but I get from a parent's point of view why you would do that. But some other things that are low in children who, you know, are possibly non-verbal or who are pre-verbal are things like creatinine. And that I have found to be life-changing for lots and lots of families. And actually, that is something that you could do, I mean, honestly, without any other intervention. It's something that you could try, and a very low dose. And what happens is that lots of our kids have a genetic SNP, which means that they can't produce. So basically there's something called the methylation cycle. And in that cycle, it's basically responsible for like every single functionality in your body and brain. Like it creates like methyl groups which attach to things to make them work properly in the body and brain. And so the end product of that is to produce creatinine, which obviously then goes on to help these functionalities. And some children have a genetic mutation, or it's called a single nucleotide polymorphism, a SNP, we call it for short. And it means that they have this mutation, which means they can't make that creatinine properly. If they have that SNP or that mutation, it's not like, this isn't like a really scary situation. It's just something that some people have, and it's common in our kids. Well, if they do have that, if you put creatinine in as like the end like product that they can't make, I have found that to be very, 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 very useful for speech. Like in some children, and this won't be true for everybody, because of course every single child is individual and unique, and like what works for one or what works for a million might not work for one, and what doesn't work for a million might work for your child because your child's body might like it. But I start with like 1/8 of a teaspoon of creatine monohydrate. You can get it bulk brand on Amazon. And I actually used this with my own daughter. It was very helpful. And the thing is about creatine as well, is it actually will help with like, there's papers published on this for brain trauma, for like traumatic brain injury. So it kind of regenerates like areas of the brain. So it's really helpful. It can be really, really helpful. So that can be low in kids who are nonverbal. And I find that really, really helpful. I found that like the B vitamins in general, but B12, or not so much high dose folate, but B12 is very helpful. But again, if we look at, because obviously if there's a B12 deficiency, then, you know, it can impact speech, because B12 is essential for brain like development. It's really, really important. So if that is deficient, then obviously it's going to impact speech. So, but we need to think about, because of course, again, if we're thinking about like B12, we have to think about like why that might be low in the first place. So one reason is that a lot of our kids have really low lithium levels, and you can check that via a hair test, and it's really accurate on a hair test, and the hair test is very cheap to get, and you could probably get it yourself. I don't know if you need a practitioner to buy it, but you probably could just access that somewhere, and we could link where, like, you know, our preferred. But if the lithium is low, lithium is essential. And this again was something that I went through with my daughter. When we did her first hair test, she had 0 lithium, and I didn't either. So God, I don't know how I'm living to tell the tale, to be honest, but I was quite delayed as a child also. I feel like mine was depleted more in later life after Rose destroyed my mental health for a few years, unfortunately. Bless her heart, she's better now. But anyway, so the lithium level is really essential, because if you don't have lithium, you need that to absorb B12. So I would check that first before like just putting loads of B12, because if you don't have lithium, they're not going to absorb it anyway. And then the other thing is that parasites, a parasitic infection, will also eat all of the B12. So if you do test that and that's low, before just whacking in loads of it, think about those others, like the root causes. And that's where we're always coming about this from, because we can do all these really high dose supplements and we can tweak things for a period. But if you don't, what we want is like sustained long-term body health, don't we? So this child can be healthy forever and live a really healthy adult life and function and do and access everything that they want and need to. And so if we address the underlying root causes of like this top level stuff, then it can just, it's so helpful. And then some other things, obviously cerebral folate deficiency, which is basically what the FRAT test tests for. But of course, if that is there, it means that folate can't get into the brain because of this antibody. So again, from my perspective, cerebral folate deficiency is important in speech, but let's think about why the immune system has done that. Is it dysbiosis? Has there been an infection early on, like something like a strep infection or Epstein-Barr, like a virus, and it's made the immune system or a vaccine that has kind of like misguided the immune system into kind of attacking itself. This can also be from passed down from parents also. If the parent has an autoimmune disorder, like this can also be passed down. And then again with speech delay, and as you know, Lara, you've found this in practice a lot, is retained primitive reflexes. And probably you can talk more about from your side sort of what, because you know more about that than me. But, in terms of like this area, we had this, I'll tell you from my perspective, obviously you're the expert, but Rose had a lot of like the reflex that's
rooting.
Rooting. Yeah. That's it. Yeah, I couldn't think of it. Yeah, she had that, and it was really like not inhibited. It was really there, like really present, and so it meant that she liked again chewing on lots of things. Yeah, and she liked eating a lot, and also speech was really delayed because of that. Because of course, like that area was like, I think hers was. I think like one bit of it was hyposensitive and one bit was hypersensitive. Maybe you'll know more on that than me. But
if you've still got your rooting reflex, you effectively can't feel your mouth and you can't feel your tongue. So therefore, how can you create words and sounds and then structure sentences if you can't actually feel your mouth? And it also, speech comes down to as well, has that motor strip, which runs from ear to ear, developed well enough? And if that motor strip hasn't developed well enough, that's where the speech area is associated with the motor strip. It's a motor action. Speaking is a motor action. So if you haven't got good motor function, that speech is not going to develop as well either. But, a lot of speech issues come down to retained reflexes, and not only just the rooting reflex, but it's also the palmar reflex, the hand reflex, because they're totally linked, because you feed with the mouth and with the hand, to the mouth. So there's a number of different things that affect speech from, my side, but inflammation is just incredibly prominent. And also if that child has multiple reflexes, not just the rooting and the palmar reflex retained, then you need to get rid of those, because they're not able to feel their body. So if you can't feel your body in space, you can't relate to other people. And then, you haven't got the motor capability in order to speak. Therefore, the retained reflexes and diet is absolutely essential for actually healing these children.
Oh, 1,000,000%. And that obviously we would always start with that. And that's the thing about like all of the things I've mentioned here, is that it's all about like the nutrients that the body needs. And obviously most of our kids live on a beige diet. And that's the other thing is picky eating, is we're like, they just don't want to eat. And we know that there is, our kids don't like change. They like sameness. It's part of like, we know this because their nervous system is on fire. So of course any change to them is so overwhelming. So they like sameness. And that's part of like the nervous system picture. However, there are underlying things that can drive that also. Things like zinc deficiency. That is so common in picky eating, and like low stomach acid, especially kids that don't like meat. If they don't have stomach acid, you won't digest meat. It will hurt.
Yeah.
And then of course, like you're going to avoid that. And then it goes into the cycle. But, low stomach acid is going to be caused by zinc deficiency. And if you're eating a beige diet, it inhibits zinc. So it's almost like this like vicious cycle of like misery that goes round and round and round. And so, and of course, like the solution to this isn't, let's just whack in a load of zinc. It's getting the body to be able to do the things it needs to. Yeah, zinc can be helpful later. But if you put that in at the start when the child's diet is just purely beige, it's not really going to do much, because the body's not going to absorb it anyway. So yeah, I think like, and then if you think about, other kids I've seen who are like very severe picky eaters, it can be because they're so constipated. If your bowel is you're so full of like waste, you're not going to be hungry. You're going to be so bloated and feel so horrible and lethargic. Like your appetite is so reduced, So it's almost like, and again, it's just these simple sort of foundations. They feel really hard when you start out, don't they? And all this probably feels overwhelming and thinking, where do we get, how does this start? But it can be something as simple as just taking gluten out. Just switching out gluten stuff for like something else, or just, I don't know, like if your child eats pancakes, blending a carrot in there, or adding a couple of seeds, or whatever. Like there's so many ways, or smoothies, like add a veggie into like something, a little bit of vegetable, a cucumber or something into their normal smoothie that's fruit filled, or whatever it is that they eat. You can find a way around it, and there's always a way around this. Like there's always solutions to everything, and it's just kind of figuring that out, isn't it? And
I think that's why we work together, because the results we know the solutions, we work through those, and we are getting the results. It was fantastic. Thank you so much, Vicky, for coming on and helping all of the parents that are listening to this podcast. I know that, all of your wisdom doesn't go unnoticed, and so many of the patients that we both work together on are seeing such huge results. You do such amazing work. Thanks. Until next time. Until next time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.